I'm again just excited to see you again. We had a great time at Black Footwear Forum. I think prior to that, the last time I probably saw you was the other one, the 2022 one. But this one like just had even more energy and excitement and just elevation of positive atmosphere. And I think you had a lot to do with it. I know you were a integral part of the programming this year, from like being on stage with Larry to our session on Sunday, which we'll get into, just touch on briefly. But I do want to take a moment because every time I meet you, man, and just converse with you, you're so authentic, you're so transparent. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with just how you were raised, man, and like your background, where you come from. When we talk about cultural currency, which was the theme of the forum this year,
Yeah.
I just want to talk about like your connection to that, the importance of culture and cultural currency in the footwear industry, because you have a long resume in the footwear industry, right? Now you're able to obviously do your own thing in these different spaces, from being an author to being a lecturer, you're having art exhibits, you're doing a bunch. So coming from the south side of the Chi to Detroit, number one, because I know you went to CCS, right?
Yep.
Still the Midwest, but different. It's a different vibe. It's a different culture. Can you talk a little bit about those early years of leaving your hometown? Because I know that's hard for a lot of people to do, and going to college over there in Detroit. What was that like?
Man, first, thank you for the kind words and for just the kind of reflection of how I show up in the world, because that's important to me. Very, very important. I would say the way I would answer that question is there's a difference between leaving home and not being able to stay where you are. And I wasn't able to stay in Chicago. Reason being, I had seen so much destruction as a result of people feeling like they had limited opportunities. Great parents. My parents have been involved in my life, my entire life. I feel very fortunate and blessed that even though they didn't grow up with consistency in terms of their parents, that they provided that for us. So I knew that in the city, south side of Chicago, having that gave me an advantage, dad and a mom. I don't pretend that I didn't have certain privileges as a result of a two-parent household. The reality of it is Chicago presented and still presents to some extent a very limited perspective of what success looks like. That can be said about any inner city environment. You know, it's very linear outcomes. You go to school, you get a good job, and then you just stay there forever. You become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. Like everything's about stability and stable work, which is a scarcity mindset. When you think about what we went through, for a lot of us, it's you get a safe job because we're not encouraged to go out and explore and build. It's about, hey, man, stay away from anything that could present a risk to you, right? Not being able to stay in Chicago because of my ambitions not fitting into that environment. My interests weren't necessarily those of my peers. And the questions I was asking weren't necessarily going to be answered with the limited amount of insight and experience that people around me had had. This isn't a critique of any of them. I just knew if I needed to become this person, to live this dream, then the first part of that adventure is me stepping out of my comfort zone. I couldn't stay in Chicago. So when we talk about leaving home, you're looking forward and you're saying you're kind of leaving behind the things that are near and dear to your heart. I don't believe you ever really leave home. You just can't stay where you are. I couldn't stay in Chicago, but Chicago stayed in me. How I show up in the world, my authenticity, as you mentioned, how I serve, how I speak life over people, how I call out stuff. I see it. I don't go home and punch the air. I say it in a moment, because it's a city that teaches you to stand on your word. Do what you say. Don't trade on your character. That's all you have. So that's a big part of that journey, leaving and coming to Detroit, was realizing that Chicago was with me everywhere I went. And my goal when I got to Detroit wasn't to try to fit in. I never really fit in, but I wanted to start to find people with shared common interests, because I understood that I was limited when I tried to search for people that liked what I liked, that had shared characteristics. And I was like, man, either I could just completely be in a bubble of my own culture and assume like, okay, I'm the only person like me, and that presents a level of narcissism, or I could be open and willing to say, there's a kid from Korea who likes what I like. There's a kid from Europe. There's a kid from the Caribbean. These kids like what I like. Let's be friends. Let's learn from each other. I took that path. So that's what not being able to stay did for me. It allowed me to move frictionlessly around the world and through industries with a level of confidence that I'll always be anchored to Chicago, but I'm not necessarily confined by what people think Chicago is.
That's why I expose my soul to the world.
That was profound, of course, in its own way. And I resonate with leaving DC and the DMV area after high school and going to Miami, which Miami ended up being my second home. But like you said, it became my second home because I took home with me. I didn't leave. I just had to relocate, right,
Yep.
to find a better opportunity. That had its own level of adjustment and transition going from your hometown, Chicago, to, Motown. And then you go from there, from the Midwest, and end up going to the Pacific Northwest and navigating those spaces, right? Even though Illinois and Michigan are different states, they have kind of similar energy in some ways. But Portland is a completely different story. And then now you're going from college to like a corporation, which is a whole different environment in and of itself. Can you talk about maybe like that transition, like going from the Midwest into the Pacific Northwest and joining a major corporation and having to like navigate those spaces while being authentic?
There's definitely a lot of things that I believe we typically don't talk about enough. Just as much as I don't believe the world should ever assume that Blackness is monolithic, I feel the same way about whiteness, because I didn't grow up necessarily in a community that was predominantly any one thing. It was like a majority of Black and brown people, but there were smatterings of like Eastern European white folks on the South Side who came over post-Holocaust to find a better life, immigrants, people coming to work on skyscrapers, working in factories. So it was like this smattering of first generation Eastern Europeans, very similar to Detroit as well. You get your Polish, your Ukrainian, a lot of, Chechnya and Bosnian, Yugoslavian. And I knew that version of whiteness, right? I knew immigrant people who didn't call themselves white. They called themselves Irish or Italian. So I didn't have an experience as a 19-year-old with the diversity of the idea of whiteness. And going to Oregon, the history of that state is that it was founded as a separatist colony that didn't want racial diversity. It wanted it to only be for a certain demographic of people. I have to put that context in place because when I arrived there in 2001, the only thing I knew about Oregon was Oregon Trail, the game we used to play in elementary school, where it was like, yo, I need to get cattle and avoid water because I might get dysentery. I didn't have a frame of reference. I knew about the Oregon Trail, I knew about Grapes of Wrath, I knew about all these stories, but I didn't understand how the state was structured. I didn't understand the history of the state. I didn't understand the nuance of what it meant to be a person of color in that state at that time because I was a fish out of water. So because of my education at CCS, being exposed to the first time to, and I say white people specifically because Oregon is majority white. So if it was any other race, I would have said that. Just for anybody listening, like he's talking, I say white, Black, Asian, I say what people are. And I don't bite my tongue because I compliment that. And I don't believe that we need to walk around this level of colorblindness because the reality is we lead with aesthetic. As human beings, we look at color as an indicator of safety and preference and flavor. So when I say someone's color, it's not to be provocative. It is because that is what I see when I look at their skin, and then their ethnicity and culture comes after I learn more about them. So in Detroit, I had the good pleasure, the good fortune of having roommates that came from parts of white culture that I never had access to. Like the kid who grew up in Arizona in a trailer park. I never met that kid. I didn't know what he went through. That was my roommate. The kid who grew up in the Bible Belt deep in Florida in the South, who came from a evangelical family that went on missionary trips. I never grew up around that kid. That was my roommate. The kid who was exceptionally wealthy, who had drivers and was ushered around New York from the Upper West Side to private schools his entire life, who's doing Bushido fighting and drives a luxury car as a freshman. I didn't grow up around that kid. That was my roommate. It was amazing. It was amazing to me to see that even though they didn't look like me, I was able to find things that I related to them on. And we built these bonds that far exceeded any skin color, any political affiliation, anything. It's just we all agreed that we like comic books and sneakers and toys and all that. So when I got to Oregon, I already had that frame of reference of like, wait, whiteness isn't monolithic. I can't assume that they like all the same things and they're all the same way because I don't want them to assume that of me. The reality is they did assume it of me. I get there and immediately when I was an intern, I would be out and about in Portland and I would explain to people like, oh, I work at Nike. First thing, oh, at the employee store? No, at the campus. Huh? What do you mean the campus? Security? No. Intern? Nah. Doing what? Designing? No way. You work at the employee store. Why are you lying? And this came from people that look like me, people that didn't look like me. So I was like culture shock. Like, yo, first of all, I was surprised most people of color in Portland didn't know Nike was located there. So that tells you at that time how information wasn't shared. When I told people that Nike was headquartered 15 minutes from Northeast Portland or 20 minutes, these people were like, what, Nike's here? All they knew was it was the ES, the employee store, and they had a factory store in MLK. Like they didn't know the headquarters was there. And this is 2001. So early internet, Nike Talk days, all the sneaker meetups, Nick DePaula and all them, they were just Nike Talk, bloggers and Alpha Project, Jason Peach, we would just all meet up. And that experience in CCS and being exposed to diversity of culture within cultures was a blessing because it helped me to navigate Oregon with a level of grace. Because then I realized that a lot of people could be my teachers. A lot of people could be my mentors. A lot of people could be my advocates. And that doesn't require them to look like me. Certain people look like me that were there, like Dwayne, obviously, that could relate to my struggle and my journey. But then for my vocational and professional development, I had to look to people that had the skills that I wanted to acquire. That was the big culture shock, man. Me having this experience of learning that whiteness isn't monolithic, me knowing that blackness isn't monolithic, but then being thrown right back into it in Oregon where people assumed that I'm just like everyone else. And we all do the same things and we all come from the same place and we all act the same way. And I'm like, wow, man, I'm coming out here giving you grace, giving you the benefit of the doubt, willing to see everyone as an individual. And I really wanted that at that age to be the case for me. So instead of me trying to contort myself to fit into an expectation, I doubled down on being me. I was like, you know what? I'm not from Portland. I didn't come from the Bay Area as a baby and move up here. I'm not a blood. I'm not like, none of that stuff that they were trying to say I was involved. I don't even understand it. I didn't grow up around that. The West Coast culture wasn't familiar to me. That was the big thing. That was the big adjustment, man, is that the conversation of ethnicity, race, culture was so ignored in the state of Oregon in the early 2000s that literally the people that we hung out with were like Damon Stoudemire and and Rasheed Wallace, because they were the only other Black people in Portland that weren't from there that understood that we weren't monolithic.
It's been so long since I heard Damon Stoudemire's name. I'm just happy to hear that. He was that guy.
He was that guy, man. Terrell Brandon, David Stoudemire, Rasheed Wallace was there. Snoop's uncle had a barbecue restaurant in Beaverton. Yeah. Snoop's uncle was selling ribs. So, I mean, we had this beautiful, close-knit community of Black folks who moved there from other parts of the country, or Black folks who've seen things and come back. And it was interesting, man. And the Nike of today, the Oregon of today, I think benefited from a lot of us coming there to work for Nike and Intel who came from the Midwest and the East Coast, from HBCUs or from schools that were more diverse than what Oregon was. So I don't know, it was definitely wild, but I'm grateful for that experience for sure.
You said a lot of nuggets, of course, in classic J. May fashion, but I heard you talk about the importance of relatability and kind of you bringing that from your experience at CCS and that really being a contributing factor to your ability to have grace in this kind of new, different space of the Pacific Northwest and Portland. Early internet days, right? Couldn't hop on Yelp or TikTok and find kind of where to go, right? You had to navigate it yourself. But inside, we're going to talk about Nike a little bit. You were able to kind of find your people, Dwayne being one of them. And by extension, Larry, too, also being one of those people. Like you had a team of brothers, mentors in a way that wanted to see you win, right? How important was it for you to be receptive to that positive leadership back then in those early years at Nike and Jordan?
I think that literally is the difference in my career versus essentially others. Larry touched on it on stage. He said, a lot of people get the information, but they do nothing with it. You've always done something with it. I knew that if these men would take time to talk with me and they were dressed in suits and they were driving these nice cars and living in these nice homes and taking these extravagant trips and making these big decisions and sitting at the head of the table, I'm like, man, anything they tell me could benefit me. Even if it's just a crumb of insight, I got to take that crumb and I got to make a meal from it. So I would go and sit in their office and not just talk about how to navigate Nike, but literally tell them like, hey, one day I want to be an entrepreneur. How can I leverage this moment? What should I do while I'm here? I'm not distracted. I'm not down the road. My foot's not out the door, but I don't want to waste any reps. I don't want to waste my time here because I do have ambitions one day of having my own. Well, what should I be paying attention to? How should I be navigating? What should I be learning? How should I look at this experience? And my conversations were very deep, very, as you can imagine, robust in terms of possibility, but I was always willing to take direction. I was always very coachable. I didn't believe I had the right answer. I didn't believe that all my ideas were the best ideas. I was convicted by everything I did, right? Like I loved everything I did, but I was still open to insight and feedback from them. And I think a lot of young employees, specifically employees of color, only reach out for feedback when they're in trouble. I'm not a person that's reactionary. Something happened, let me go find a Black executive to help me get out of it. I'm proactive. I'm preventative. Hey, what could happen and how do I avoid that? what could happen if I'm not, and how do I get ready and be prepared for that? I saw what happens when someone is unprepared growing up on the south side of Chicago. I mean, people get shot, robbed, harmed, cheated on, lied to. Like, that's the nature of man. So I was already well versed in understanding that anything can happen to anyone, anywhere. I didn't have this arrogance that I'm here now. They can't get rid of me. They need me. Something that I see now is a very common sentiment in the culture is people believe companies need them. No, your family needs you. The company needs you to do your job. We need to let go of the ego. They will fire us regardless of if we're a great contributor or not. They'll let us go. And they'll remind us like, hey, we can find any warm body to fill a seat. Now, they can't find someone to do what you do the way you do it. That is factually accurate. But none of us own our roles unless we run our own companies. And even then, you working for the IRS. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're trying to, you always report to someone. And that was the thing I took away from my time with Dwayne and with Larry. Dwayne is very direct. Being managed by him, he'll tell you, oh man, this is going to go wrong. This is going to happen to you. He was my sounding board because I'm an optimist. I'm like, all right, let me talk to someone who's probably the most neutral person I can ask so that they don't show any emotional attachment to what I'm doing. They just going to shoot me straight. That was Dwayne. Larry, his style of mentorship was he would listen to the things I wasn't saying, and he'll just keep asking me questions. And then once he hears exactly the thing I'm trying to understand, then he would tell me a story about himself and put it in context. Both of them helped me to understand there's a difference between a mentor and an advocate. A mentor is a person who has information who wants to help. An advocate is a person who has information that can help. Dwayne and Larry became advocates. A lot of us are like, oh, could you mentor? But can I help you though? Can I advocate for you? Do I have juice in the room to bring your name up to get you an opportunity? If not, then we both in the same boat. So our people don't need more mentorship. We need more advocacy. That's what we need, more advocacy, man. Larry advocated for me. Dwayne advocated for me. Gina Warren advocated for me. Trevor Edwards advocated for me. And the reason why I think they did it is because they saw me consistently allowing myself to be coached, seeking feedback before I make a mistake, building relationship before I needed something from them, honestly being curious and consistent. And when somebody gave me insight, when I applied it, I would send them an email saying, hey, I applied what you told me. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. I did these little things to let them know I wasn't just trying to name drop and say I had a meeting with the president of Jordan Brand. I actually was there because I want to learn. And that set me apart because some of my peers were like, how do you know this person? How do you know that person? I'm like, the thing is it's not how I know them. It's the fact that they allow me to get to know them. They feel comfortable enough with this young kid who's untested. They feel comfortable being authentic because they saw I honestly was showing up as my full self and I needed their guidance. So that'd be my advice to young folks trying to seek some type of mentorship or advocacy in corporate America. Don't expect of others what you don't expect of yourself. Expect of yourself the very thing that you expect of others, and they'll notice it in you and they'll want to pour into you.
These advocates in your life kind of created this safe space for you in this new environment that allowed you to be your authentic self in a different way. You did that on Sunday with us in a different way, but in that same energy, that same intention, allowing those of us to share and to be heard, to listen in a non-judgmental format. I won't, of course, say what was said by others because it was in confidence and it was a safe and trusted space.
Yeah.
I certainly saw a through line with men who do so much for other people that don't often feel like things can be done for them in that regard. And I want to end on that note and just why that space was so important for us all to walk away from BFF with, for all, but especially for men and men who deal and handle a lot, to have those therapeutic moments, those safe spaces when we check in with each other.
Yeah.
Why is that so important? And why was it important to you to create that space for us?
I only can speak for Black and brown men because it's the experience that I've had. We never get a chance to just talk without worrying if we're talking too much. We never get a chance to just speak without wondering if somebody's going to cut us off and let us complete a thought. We don't even get a chance to sit and experience people looking at us at scale with a look of expectation of something good coming out of our mouth or something good coming from us. So it was important for me to create a space where a Black man wasn't told to hurry up, get to the point. Brother, share what's going on. We're going to sit and listen. You got full audience. We're going to listen as long as you want to talk. We're going to listen. because brothers can self-monitor and be like, hey, I know I didn't talk too much, but somebody, they needed to get it out. They needed to be heard, and needed for someone to just sit and listen and be like, of course you feel that way, bro. Of course you feel that way. Look at what you've been through, right? So that was the first piece. Like I've had that experience in my life, and I know how it made me feel to have another brother just listen non-judgmentally and not try to give me answers or solutions, but just listen to me. That was huge for me. The other thing, as I mentioned, having that experience of someone looking at you with eyes of expectation of positive outcomes, that's critical, because anytime we walk into a room as a Black and brown man, and I only can speak to my experience, a majority of the time we're processing, how do we make everybody else feel safe with us being in the room? Like, our safety is a result of if we can make other people feel safe first. And it's the strangest thing. The scariest place on the planet for a Black man is the elevator. And people don't understand that. Like, I can't get on an elevator if a certain demographic is on there alone. Or if a certain person looks a certain way, I have to ask myself, is it worth it? Or do I just wait to the next one? Because it isn't a matter of if I'm a threat. It's a matter of what people think I am, not who I am.
Perceived threat, yeah.
It's perceived threat. And that perception has cost many of us our lives, our jobs. And then it's the oops, oh, I didn't know. Oops, he was a good guy. Oops, I don't want to oops in my life. That's the burden that a lot of brothers carry, is like, man, I could do all this work and it could be one person who assumes I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be in there. Oops, here we go again. So I wanted to create an environment where there was no oops. There was no hurry up and get to the point. There was just, man, I'm looking at you because I love you. I'm looking at you because I know you got greatness in you. I'm listening to you because I actually care. I'm not waiting to respond. I'm actually listening to understand. And that's a big, small, subtle, that's a subtle difference in how we need to be spoken to and with as men of color. Is most people listen to us so they can wait for us to stop talking so they can respond and tell us what we need to do to fix ourselves or fix our problems. They're not listening to understand. Everybody came into that room essentially sharing the same thing, but from different perspectives. We had a very exceptional seasoned executive share what he went through, and we had brothers who just came home from being locked up saying the same thing. So that tells you there's a strategy at play to make us feel all mentally under duress. And if we can find commonality between a brother who hustled in the street and a brother who hustled in the corporate boardroom, then that's how we build community with each other. That's how we see, like, oh man, you're not a sellout because you took a corporate job, man. You're doing the best you can to feed your family. You're not a bum because you out here hustling and it ain't working out and you trying to figure out your next move. You a man that's trying to figure out how to build his own world. I respect that. And that was really what I wanted to create, man. Just no egos, no drama, no judgment. And I started that over the past year because I think it surprises people when I share the things I've been through. And they're like, man, you? I'm like, yeah, bro. I just make decisions in spite of my insecurities and fears and setbacks. I don't let them stop me from making a decision and trying, but they're always present. It's always present. It just doesn't govern my decision-making. So that was the point, man. Like, I wanted to bring the culture back to what I know it to be, which is community, real fellowship. Because right now you go to the internet and like I said, everybody too damn cool. Everybody overly cool. And you think that they got this amazing life and they killing it. And then you find out they drug addicted, got anxiety, and marriages are falling apart, depressed, but they got to feed the algorithm. They got to look cool. They got to do the cool thing. I'm so over that. I don't even care. I don't care about that anymore. I care deeply about saving as many brothers' lives as I can through telling them about my journey, because we're the fastest growing demographic in terms of suicide attempts and completed suicide. Black men are, Black children are. So that's telling us something, man. Like, if we're all feeling this way, and we're all going through this, then it's on us. It's on us to be a little bit more transparent and to build those safe spaces for brothers to at least have a moment of reprieve from having to navigate a world that constantly sees them like a predator in a cage. When they look at us, I don't know, I don't wish anyone had this feeling of like having someone stare at you like you're a wild animal getting ready to pounce on them. Like when you walk past a person and they grab their kid or they grab their purse or they lock their door, what that does to you every time is make you feel like, damn, am I that bad of a person? Do I present that much of a threat? I thought I was smiling. I thought I was a nice, damn. And that eats at you. That eats at your confidence. That eats at your self-worth. And it turns into anger because you don't have a way to explain that to people because they'll tell you it's not happening. So that was a room where there was no gaslighting, where what you said, we believed. If you said it happened to you, we believed you. If you said you feeling that way, we believed you. We don't have those spaces, man. Because anytime we say something's going on, we're being gaslit, like, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, here we go again. It's the race card. Oh, get over it. It's like, how can you get over something that we never had the tools to get over? In order to get over it, we first need to say what it is. What is it we're trying to get over? And then give us the tools to do that. So that's what I want to do, man, is I'm not going to sit here and try to say I'm going to heal the world, but what I can do is present some tools that maybe helps people heal themselves, because ain't nobody coming to save us. It's on us, man. Ultimately, the Most High is going to save us from a spiritual perspective. But in terms of right now, we are the extension of the Most High. We have to be the church. We have to be the gathering of minds who present a bit of eternity and glory in this reality through brotherhood and fellowship, and creating environments where you come as you are and you're welcomed. We have brothers in the room who from the LGBTQ community. That doesn't make them any less of a brother. I really wanted that to come across. Like, we got to get away from talking about blackness being monolithic and masculinity being affiliated with violence, or your blackness being affiliated with what level of trauma you've been exposed to. If you grew up in the suburbs, you ain't black enough. What, man, please. I don't want my son to see none of that stuff I seen. That don't make him any less black. So those are the things that were running through my mind. If I can create a room where it didn't matter who the brother loved, didn't matter who the brother prayed to, didn't matter what he did, in that room they felt accepted, then that to me is what the culture should be about.